Hello and welcome. This is Art Fuel. I'm a technical product line manager with VMware in the Cloud Native Apps business unit. And today I'll be walking through the PKS installation phase 1 for our PKS-Ninja-Lab environment. And we have RDP session open to our, our vCenter ready, all set up and ready to get going with the PKS installation. First here, let's review a few introduction elements. First, how to find this, right? You want to go to the home page, which is CNA Tech PKS Ninja repo. And we're at the home page. Notice it's currently the default branch is master, and that is aligned with the PKS version 1.3. And today we're going to be looking at PKS 1.4. So you want to click here on the branch window and click on PKS 1.4. Once you're here, you'll go ahead and click on Courses, and we're going to go to PKS the hard way, right? That is not meant to be a challenge. It's just saying this is the manual installation path. You know, we do have automated installation paths, which are a little simpler and faster, but you know, this is a great educational experience. We already recorded the video for NSXT manual installation and NSXT configuration for PKS. So if you're interested in reviewing those videos, you can check out the PKS-Ninja-Labs YouTube channel, and you should see those videos there. Now, if you've gone through this series with us, maybe you started off with our baseline template, right? But we maintain a series of templates. Let's see if we can look and see here's some information about the 4 templates that should currently be available. In some cases, the template transfers to various different destination catalogs is a complicated process, and so they're not always all of them are not always available on every OneCloud organization where you may be accessing the lab environment from. But in general, you should see this set of 4 templates, and we can see here this baseline. So if you again started with us when we started this PKS the hard way video series, we started here with this baseline template, and then we've gone through the NSXT. Let me just duplicate this real quick so we can review without losing that page. We went through the NSXT manual installation and NSXT configuration, and so now if you've gone through that process in your current lab environment, great, you know, you're ready to proceed. But also notice we have a template saved already in this state, and so this is same as the base V12 template with NSXT pre-installed. And actually, I should change those instructions, because it's not only installed; it also has the full configuration. So this one's ready to install NSXT. So ready to install PKS. And really, the intent there, many of these lab environments, and also with your work and other life schedule, you may not be able to do this all at once. And so you could come in one day, load the baseline template, work through the NSXT installation and configuration, and then call it a day. And maybe you want to, or for any reason you're at a point where you want to install PKS, but you may not want to install NSXT. So you can load this NSXT ready template as well, and then you can start with the PKS portion of our installation path here. And next we have the PKS installed template, and this has actually the entire PKS control plane installed. This is hardware installed. The intent here is to have a template that's pretty much ready to go, but one where you want to have the experience of deploying the Kubernetes cluster yourself, as that is a common request that we get. So we have that template, and then finally the cluster ready template, which has everything installed, ready to go. You know, if you this is probably going to be, or it probably is the most used template, because while there will be times where you may want to come and practice an install, usually you gain comfort with that, and then want to work on a different feature lab to learn different sorts of things about the product. And so this cluster ready template allows you just to load it up and start working on one of the feature labs after. And keep in mind, that if you're accessing through Quick Demo or VMware Learning Platform, those platforms have a queue where they may preload these templates for you, so you may have an experience where you log in and it's immediately ready to go. But there is always a boot time for these. We're basically taking an entire in virtualized data center, shutting it down entirely, and bringing the entire data center back up from scratch. And so it does take somewhere around 40 minutes to load these if you're loading them in one cloud, or if you do load through VLP or QD. Sometimes again they don't have any in the buffer, so you might have a time where you have to wait, and just be prepared to wait 40 minutes to an hour at times for these environments to boot up. Okay, now let's go ahead and jump in and get into our Ops Manager installation. I'm going to start. Let's go here to my RDP session. Okay, you can see my vCenter environment here, and the first step is to deploy Ops Manager. It's a real simple task. It's just an OVF deploy wizard, so we're going to right click on our management cluster here and do the deploy OVF template. We'll go ahead and select local file, choose files, and again look in the E downloads directory, and you should see this file here, Ops Manager vSphere. At the time I built this template, 2.5 was still the current release. Now they're starting to move to 2.6, but so you're free to go to PivNet and download Ops Manager. There isn't any particular restriction for being able to download that. So if you'd rather use 2.6, there are some additional steps though that I know we're gonna have to add to the lab guide once I get to setting up 2.6 myself. But for now, we're going to go through this process for 2.5.6. It's almost the same. I think there's a new certificate setting that needs to be set up for the 2.6 and beyond Ops Managers. So, anyways, let's go ahead and press OK here, and next, and we'll call this OpsMan. Oops, not OpsMan. And next. Okay, and we're going to put this on management cluster. And we can go ahead on review details screen, take a quick look at the details here, and we'll go ahead and click next. And keep in mind here, it's good to click the storage array that you want, or the data store, excuse me, that you want before you select the virtual disk format. Because you notice I'm going to want to use O2, but if I change this to thin now and then click to O2, it changes back to thick. It's the default setting. So we're going to select the data store first, and then change our virtual disk format to thin provision. We'll go ahead and click next. And excuse me, yes, this one is going to go to the LS PKS management network, of course. And click next, and let's do our .31. And you can see these values are again in this lab guide that we're looking at here on the PKS-Ninja repository. So I have that open in a separate window, and so I'm just following along with the lab guide. And if you remember earlier, when we were setting up the NAT rules, which is in the NSXT configuration for Enterprise PKS video, which you can find on the PKS-Ninja-Labs YouTube channel, we set up a bunch of NAT rules, and if you'll remember, these are this range, this 172.31.0 network is what we set up for the PKS management network, and we also set the NAT rules to translate from external subnet to this as the internal. So now this is Ops Managers being deployed to this PKS management network, and we'll sit there on the same subnet alongside of Bosch and the PKS API server and the harbor as well. So let's see, 72.31.0.1. So I can't do two things at the same time. And let's see, and this is actually, we're gonna do the ntp.corp.local here, if it lets us. And I'm gonna let's see, the password is our standard VMware bang password. One bang. There we are. And we don't, let's see. And we'll call this opsman. And that's that. Now we'll go ahead and click finish and wait for this to deploy. We can observe, if you make sure your recent task section is expanded, you can observe the progress here. And I'm going to go ahead and pause this while we wait for this to complete. Okay, now we can see that our template has finished deploying here. And next thing we'll have to do is right click and power it on. Now the next step, we're going to open up a web browser to the FQDN for opsman, or you can go to the IP address for opsman. But we're going to give it a couple minutes here to boot up, and I'll resume the video. Okay, I think I've given enough time for my opsman to boot up here, and we can see it's pulled an IP address, or vCenter has observed its IP address. That's usually a good sign. We have a bookmark in the bookmark here, Ops Manager, and it brings us. I didn't generate CA certificates for this, and so it's self-signed, and so usually for most of these you have to bypass these warnings. No problem. And let's see. If you're following along on the web guide, we're on step 1.11, and we're going to select internal authentication. We'll pick admin as the username. We're going to do our standard VMware one bang password. Also this decryption passphrase. There's no proxy that we have to worry about in this environment. Agree to the terms, and then click Set Up Authentication. And this will take 2 or 3 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. Okay, now that has completed, and it brings us to the login page here. Admin and VMware one bang. Standard log password. And hold on, what am I doing wrong? Admin. There we go. Must have typed in something wrong the first time. Okay, and now we can see here, this is opsman. As you saw, pretty simple to install. And this is again a dashboard, and it helps us to deploy products. And so Bosch Director is kind of works hand in hand with Ops Manager. You can think of Ops Manager as kind of like a dashboard for Bosch, because the initial setup, you set up a Bosch VM, and Ops Manager it helps to get that Bosch Manager VM initially set up. But from there on out, the additional products that we'll deploy through this Ops Manager dashboard are actually installed and managed by Bosch. So first, to get Bosch set up here, we're going to come through here, and there's no complex scripting we need to do to get this done. We just have to determine what the values are that we need to fill in, how we want to configure our environment, and then enter the values. So we have, let's see. And actually, before we get to filling in these values, we're going to follow the steps in the lab guide. We're on step 2 now, deploy Bosch. And as you can see here in the lab guide, we follow some steps to generate some certificates first. And so we're going to give a certificate to Bosch, and then Bosch will use that certificate to sign the certificates of any VMs that it deploys. And so we'll go ahead and follow these steps here. From the Control Center desktop, we're going to open up PuTTY and look for this Ubuntu CLI VM. CLI VM is just a Ubuntu jump box that we have here in our lab environment for things that we want to use Linux for. And so we're going to go ahead and create our NSX cert CNF file here with nano, and just go ahead and paste the certificate details in here directly from the PKS-Ninja lab guide window. And looks like everything is straight, no extra spaces. So I'm going to Control O, enter, and Control X to exit Nano. Moving on to step 2.3 in the lab guide, we're going to go ahead and create some environmental variables here for our NSX manager. So that way when we call OpenSSL to generate the certs, it's going to depend on these environmental variables that we created there. So we're going to go ahead and still in step 2.3, copy this long string that we have here that gets OpenSSL to generate the cert using the certificate request template that we created before, and according to the variables that we've defined here for in the lab guide. So now we'll in following step 2.4, we're just going to review that both of those this created a we created both the NSX cert and the NSX key files. So we have our cert and our private key. And you know, there's nothing special about these. We're just going to paste these values into the location required as we're doing our configuration. And so just to save these, a nice way to save these here is we've got this utility Notepad++, pretty handy if you'd like to use these, and you can always just keep your Ubuntu window open here. But I'm going to go ahead and actually copy those lines so that way when I paste it in, it's very clear which is which. And we'll go ahead and paste this here in. Close that. In Notepad++, this is a placeholder for now, and minimize that, and go ahead and minimize this. No, and actually, rather than just, we're actually going to save these files properly now. Let me take a minute to do that. And so, our NSX cert, we'll take that, and we'll take the rest of this below this line, cut it out, and paste it into a new window. We'll save. This one is cleaned up here, so we'll go ahead and save this as save as, and we're going to call this one, let's see, what did we say this one was called? nsx.crt. Let's see. Come on, keyboard. nsx.crt. Save. And over here, we're going to save, we'll clean this up. This one's going to be nsx.key. And while we could use CLI to submit this information to the different locations that we're going, we're just going to save these files here since we're on the same workstation here with our web browsers, and so we can upload these files directly through that manual process. Let's see, and then we'll go ahead and save this as nsx.key. And I don't know why I'm saving these in the putty folder, but that's where they're getting saved this time. Let's see. Okay, and so now we're going to go ahead and log in to NSX Manager. Following step, let's see, where are we? 2.7 in the lab guide. And we'll go here to System and Certificates, and we're going to import a certificate, and let's see, import certificate, and we'll call this nsx-api-cert. And then for certificate components here, we're going to go ahead and browse for the NSX CRT file. And we need to find to save that in PuTTY, so it should be where. Yes, so NSX cert. And make sure. Okay. And then for the private key, we're going to go here and get that nsx.key file. Open that. And we'll just leave the passphrase blank for this one, excuse me. And let's see. And we do not want the service certificate enabled for this. So then we'll press import. Okay. Now we're going to go back to the session with CLIV and make an API call to finalize the registration of this certificate. And so you can see here in step 2.9, here's what we're going to do. And we see we're going to just re-verify. This is already done, so we actually don't need to do this again. Sometimes I put a redundant step in there that's not harmful, just to make sure in case somebody had closed the bash shell and reopened it, they may need to re-export these variables. But in this case, we don't necessarily need to do the exports. Main thing here, look at this export certificate ID. Replace this with a certificate ID from your previous step, and then we have our curl. So we'll go ahead and copy these, and I'm going to go into my Notepad++ here. I don't want to paste these directly in because I do need to modify them right before I submit it. And now we'll go back into our NSX manager window here. We can see the NSX API cert that we created, and we can see the ID for it. So we can copy that and jump back into here and replace this text. Okay, and I pressed Control C instead of Control V, so let me copy that again. And not there. I'll paste this in here and clean that up. Okay, and now we can actually copy and paste these values into our session with CLI-VM, and that'll make this curl command, which will reach out to NSX Manager and have it confirm that this is the certificate it's going to use for the API. So let's go ahead and go back to our Ubuntu host here, make our API call, let that register, and that's good. We didn't get any errors back, so now I'll move forward. Now we'll go ahead and go to the back to our Opsman window. Make sure we're in this Bash directory for vSphere. Right, if we come to the home page, we're just going to click on the tile, and that brings us right here to this top tab for vCenter config. And we're going to go ahead and type in the values now. And you can see here on step 2.11, all the values that we're going to type in here are provided. So I'm just going to pause the video real quick while I'm typing in. Okay, I finished typing in these values for connecting to our local vCenter. Again, just following the lab guide verbatim. And now we're going to go here and click NSX networking. And I'm going to go ahead and pause it while I enter these. Okay, you can see I've pasted the values, select NSXT, put our IP address, username, and password, which is VMware 1Bang, VMware 1Bang, so we double that up because there's increased password complexity requirements for NSX, and then for some of the other hosts in our lab. And I also went in here to the VM folder, template folder, disk path folder, and changed this to PKS. By default, this said like PCF VMs, so if you see that, just change those to say PKS. And now we're going to take the nsx.crt file text that we got before, and we're just going to copy all this text here, go into here and paste this here. Now you'll notice here I put the NSX address, IP address, instead of the domain name, right? And the reason why it's usually better. I'm sorry, the host name. It's usually, I think, preferred. I prefer to use a host name when possible, and it's perfectly fine to do here. But it is important when you generate your certificate, you generate it with the appropriate name, so that way the certificate works appropriately, right? And in this case, I generated the cert there to be associated with the IP address correctly, but not the host name. And so I need to go through those steps again. And frankly, what I should do here, a better way of doing this would be use this local Windows server here, has a certificate authority, generate the certificate through that way. So at some point, hopefully I will, me or somebody will update the lab guide with doing it that way. But this is a functional implementation, works good. Just keep in mind, if you can definitely use your host name here, you just have to make sure when you generate the certificate, you use the appropriate parameters to generate that successfully. So now that we've finished our first page here, and now that's saved, we can see we can move to the second tab here, the director config, following step 2.12 in the lab guide, and we're going to do ntp.corp.local, and we will enable this VM Resurrector plugin and enable post-deploy scripts. We'll look for recreate all VMs, and this is on the next deploy. So there's no VMs now. This is like a one-time setting thing here that so when you save it, when you apply your config, it'll make sure that it recreates if needed on the next deploy. So we really probably don't need to set that there, but I know it doesn't hurt anything, so we'll just leave that there for now. We'll leave the other settings for their default values on this page, and go ahead and click save. Now, continuing on with step 2.13 in the lab guide, we're going to go to create availability zones. We click add over here to add an AZ, and we'll call this PKS Management 1. And for the cluster, we're going to call this region AO1-MGMT01. And resource pool is PKS-MGMT-1. And you can always pop over into vSphere just to double check those values, but they're all aligned with how we have, if you just follow the lab guide, you should be good for everything. Okay, and then we'll leave host group blank. We're not using host groups. And so we'll go ahead and, let's see here. Click add again to add a second availability zone, right, before you click save. And here for this one, we're going to call it PKS-comp. And this one will be for our region AO1-COMP01 cluster, and the resource pool is PKS-comp1-1. Okay, now we can go ahead and save that page. Now we'll go ahead to the Create Networks tab, and following on step 2.14 of the lab guide, we're going to enable ICMP checks. We're going to add a network here, and we'll call this PKS-MGMT, and this is going to use our PKS control plane network that we created, our LS-PKS management network. LS-. Okay. And the CIDR here is 172.31.0.0/24. And our reserved IP address ranges are 172.31.0.1 and 172.31.0.3, which is what we've assigned to Ops Manager here. Okay, and the same DNS as usual for the lab. Gateway is 172.31.0.1. And for this, we'll pick both the PKS Management 1 and the PKS Comp Availability Zone. And save this page. Okay. We'll continue on here with step 2.15, and we're going to go to this assign AZN networks, and for the singleton availability zone we'll choose PKS management 1, and the network will choose PKS management, and save. Next we'll check on the security tab, and we're going to make sure this include ops manager root CA in trusted certs. Now that's a very useful setting, and this means for anything that gets deployed by Bosch, it's going to include, it's going to sign the certificate with the ops manager, and ensure that the CA cert is installed locally for anything that Bosch deploys. And that's a really useful thing, is if you consider you're deploying if you deploy a Kubernetes cluster, those are going to have Docker hosts in them, right? And if you need to connect to a container registry, you have to have each of those hosts that's running, each of those Kubernetes nodes that's going to run a container, or potentially have to communicate with the registry server, the container registry. And so you have to figure out a way to, or manually potentially go and set up those certificates. Well, in the case of Enterprise PKS here, as part of its automatic deployment, it takes care of that. And so you deploy Harbor with this, and you deploy and use Harbor as your registry. Harbor will inherently be trusted by your Kubernetes worker nodes, just through automation with this setting. So we'll go ahead and click save. And let's see. So next we go to our resource config tab here, and we're going to look at the let's see, resource config in second row to the third medium option. Okay, so we're going to go here and change this to medium.disk, and go ahead and click save. And now we will go back here into the installation dashboard. And actually, if you saw, you can see all the required settings that we need to set are here, and so we're all set for deploying this. And so we just basically created a configuration file. And next, if we go to this review pending changes here, if we apply changes, then Ops Manager will go ahead and deploy this for us, and we just wait for it to go and deploy that. Okay, our Bosch directory deployment succeeded. You should see there was actually a splash page here that said succeeded, and I accidentally clicked on something and it went away, but you should see a screen that said it succeeded. And you can also scroll down to the bottom of this log page here, and you can see that we succeeded. If we like, we can also jump over into vSphere, and we can now see this resulted in the deployment of a couple different VMs here. The one that is here, VM dash, if you go over here, we can see this deployment is Bosch, right? It's directed by Bosch, and the one it's named pBosch is here, and that is our Bosch director virtual machine. And Bosch also utilizes some worker virtual machines when it needs to, when it has tasks to process, deployments to make, right? It'll spin up. You'll see sometimes one or more of these virtual machines that are prepended with this SC, and those are essentially slaves for Bosch, and it has them just do tasks when it's making again processes. Okay. So and actually we did wait for that to install this time, but actually if you look over at the PKS install phase 1 lab guide here, it actually says you can do some of these things while that deployment is running, so you don't have to sit still. There's some additional homework that we have to do here, and one homework that we have to do here is this setting up a NSX principal identity certificate. And so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and move the lab guide to the other window, and it says open a browser tab and select Opsman. So we'll go into our Opsman, and now what we're going to do here is we're going to go back to our installation dashboard, and before we do the NSXT principal identity, actually we'll click here on the home page, and now we're going to get this set to where we see a tile for our enterprise PKS deployment. So we'll go to import product, and we're going to go back to our downloads directory, and we can see here this one that says Pivotal Container Service 1.4.1, or feel free if you'd like to jump onto PivNet and download a more recent version. And we'll go ahead and press open, give that a minute, and we actually don't have to wait for that to finish. It should only take a minute or two there, but we can go ahead and jump on over. So that's all we're going to do there, is to prep it to where the PKS tile is there, because these steps to generate the NSXT principal identity need to be done before we complete that configuration anyways. And so we're going to go back into our PuTTY session and back into Ubuntu at CLI VM. They're in the saved PuTTY sessions. And now we're going to, whoops, that apparently I had accidentally right clicked and I had something on the clipboard, so didn't do any harm there. So now I'm going to we'll make this file here for setting up our principal identity, and this is actually a script that handles the certificate generation for the principal identity already set up for us, so we can just cut and paste that from the lab guide, and we'll press Control O to save and Control X. So now we can go ahead and run that script. And for the password, let's see. And we're going to do that double VMware one bang. So VMware one bang, VMware one bang, enter. And now we have generated our PI cert. So in the output, there should be this ID. So we're going to want to make note of the ID value here. Okay. And now we can review the contents of the certificate files that the CA cert and the private key that generated. With just checking out, we can see we have a superuser.crt file and a superuser.key file. And let's see, now we'll move on to step 3.9. We're going to register the principal identity for PKS. So we're going to create another script file, and we'll go back into CLI VM here, and we're going to use the Nano text editor for this. And then going back into step 3.9, in our lab guide, it has the text of the script that will handle the API, getting everything ready and making the API call to register the principal identity. So we'll cut and paste that in here. But also there are some instructions there. If you read step 3.10, don't paste and cast don't use this script exactly. Make sure to change the certificate ID to the one we saw earlier, which, if we scroll up here, it's this certificate ID here. So we can highlight this again. I'll just keep the quotation over there. Good enough. Now I'll come down here and we see, let's see, the certificate ID is going to be right here. We can see on this fifth line or so down, it says replace this text with your certificate ID. So we'll go ahead and paste that value there. We had a leading space, so I'm going to go ahead and take the leading space out. And then we'll go ahead and save this. Control O, enter, Control X to close it. And now we can source the create PI shell script that we have there to run it. And we're going to do the double VMware one bang password again as our passphrase. Okay, you see it now gave us some nice results here. So we can see, and we can actually, we got the role enterprise admin, and it gives us a certificate and ID, some other interesting information. We can go in and also verify this in the NSXT Manager UI. So let's go back and log back in here. And then here. And one of the verification step we'll use for this, we're going to go ahead and look at our users. And we didn't, if you, we didn't actually go through checking this before, but if you go and load a fresh template, you'll see this is not a pre-created user here. That the scripts we just ran through made some API calls, created this PKS NSXT super user role associated with the enterprise admin and the principal identity certificates we generated. Okay, and that is the end of our phase 1 lab guide. Right, so next steps: complete PKS installation with install phase 2 labs. So I will come back in the next video here, and we'll go back. We can just see how to get there. If you click on the lab guides, make sure you're on branch PKS 1.4, PKS install phase 2. And so I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for listening.